That's
Actually,
beside
let's
the
talk
point.
about that. The Garden of Ban video,
Oh,
because
cool.
that one, the first one and the second one both, to me, are like absolutely genius and harken back to the good old days of ye old Adventure Karma content. Ignore me because that makes no sense at all. But I really liked the second one because the first one has this theme of you're defending the game because people are getting mad at it for like no reason. And then the second one, you are getting mad at it for an actually substantive reason that people actually foresaw.
Yeah.
And it's just funny how your mind changed to be like not I don't know. Would you say that like you thought like you figured like they were right after all, or was it like a different stance altogether?
It's not a different stance because I agreed with like almost all of the criticism for Garden of Banban 1. Um, to me, to me it's weird because there's so many games out there that like to just pick on like a random free Steam game, to me it's kind of like, is this what you're gonna do with all your review time? Because it's all like, because you know, indie horror and stuff, it's what people are talking about. And what it was to me is that it felt weird that like there was all this like content pumped out about like, Garden of Banban is awful and stuff, but like something like Security Breach, which was like a really bad game as well, not to the point of Garden of Banban, but still a pretty like bad game overall that came from like an actual game studio, relatively was just kind of like accepted. There's a weird double standard where I feel like people are more
Because
willing.
it's FNAF, bro. It's
Yeah,
the big name,
it's the
dude.
big names get a weird pass sometimes. Like, don't get me wrong, they get criticized, but I feel like people are less willing to just like pump out a bunch of videos on like, indie horror is terrible if it's like a big game. So I was like, I didn't really understand where all the hate for Garden of Banban specifically was coming, because it was a free Steam game. I'm used to them. They're bad. We all know this. And I did,
The beauty of
and I was originally going to make fun of it, but then I saw everybody making fun of it. And I'm like, well, I don't really have anything else to say now other than I feel like we're really like hating on this game for like no substantial reason, especially when something like Poppy Playtime also did most of like the actual scummy things. Poppy Playtime was probably worse, and you do see a big level of hate for it, don't get me wrong, but again, because it has like quality and it's a big name, I feel like people are more afraid to hate on it, so they'll go hate on the little guy because not as many people are going to defend it. But all the criticism was valid, and as soon as they started making me pay for it, that means that you think you have an actual good product on your hands. At which point, I no longer care. I paid for this, so you're gonna get my full thoughts. I'm willing to
so
defend
so
something if it's free, but once you ask me to pay for it, I don't care anymore.
so let me get this straight. So you initially took a devil's advocate stance, partly for the meme and partly because you agreed, and now you're on that stance all 100% because you agree, and because, as you put it, it's the first free Steam game that cost money, which is a genius phrase, by the way, because it gives you that impression of, you know, free Steam game people treat as an actual like subgenre of games now is just free Steam game, and like now you're saying that free Steam games cost money now, and it's like,
Yeah,
it opens up.
yeah, it's a it's a weird phenomenon because, like I said, there's bad games that you have to pay for. Something like Security Breach. I'm just using it as example because I genuinely do not understand how the studio got away with that with as little pushback as it did. I mean, I'm fine with it. I really don't care. I'm not like, they're problematic. It just shocks me that the entire community was just like, fair enough. And it just kind of moved on. It shocks me. But like, it's a bad
Yeah.
game. You have to pay for it. But it's not really a free Steam game. It doesn't have that vibe. And Garden of Banban was the first time I paid for a game, played it, and it felt like I was playing a free Steam game. And that's the difference. It's hard to describe. It's a piece. It's a feeling you have about a game. it's not about the price or the platform it released on. There are bad games which cost money, but then you just get to a certain level of like low quality. It's just like what is even happening? Was more than 3 minutes put into any of this? I
You're
saw
treating free Steam games like it's a spiritual endeavor,
it
like it's some
is
kind of like encounter, you know?
it is. It's really a spiritual awakening. You see so much stuff. I saw this video that popped up on my feed being like, I recreated Garden of Banban in a week, and I was like, that would be more impressive if I thought that they had spent more than a week on it. If anything, I feel like you spent a bit too long in that game. Like,
Wow, that cut deep. Jeez.
so you gave yourself a little
Is
bit more time than the developers did, I think, but pop off.
it's interesting though because you say that the big names get a pass, and I think it's because there's a line that's blurred between a bad game, like mechanically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and a bad game, um, I don't know, canonically speaking.
Yeah.
The like there are two games that I think of from big names that get a pass. And one of them is what you say, it's FNAF Security Breach. Mechanically, that's a bad game, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, canonically, there's a technically bad game, or at least the least well received game of the Doom franchise, which is Doom 3, because it makes no sense in any continuity that you can arrange it. So, what basically happens is that the original 1990s Doom games and Doom 64 are in the same timeline as Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, which is proven in Doom Eternal. And Doom 3 is the only major release that's just kind of floating out there all by itself. And, you know, there's other smaller Doom releases like, I mean, Sigil from Romero Games, and then all the other subsequent Doom releases around Doom 2, like Plutonia and TNT Evolution and stuff, and there's all that. But in the mainline series, Doom 3, it's not necessarily a bad game, though I guess I could argue that it is because a lot of the weapons in it are really bad. And canonically, it doesn't make sense because it doesn't harken back to the vibe that any of the other games give. It tries to take on a far more horror-style experience, whereas the rest of the games are just shoot stuff,
Yeah.
right? And that's a formula that remains that whole if it's not broke don't fix it thing for a long time, and then they fixed it and it's like people were just confused. And so when I think of games that like from big names that get a pass, or at least from big series, not necessarily the studios but like a big series, it's FNAF, like your example, Security Breach, and Doom 3. But the problem is that they're two very different kinds of passes. Yeah. And I think over time, especially on the indie side of things, the line gets blurred between what is more so a mechanically bad game as opposed to a canonically bad game. And so it at this point it doesn't really matter which one it is, as long as it's from a big name. It'll at least be received with enough critical acclaim to make a marginal amount of profit.
Yeah.
But with Steam games, it's like
Yeah, and also what you said sparked my mind is that what I think what a bad Steam game really is about is like incoherence on every level of it, because that's something I brought up in my Garden of Banban video, that I don't know where bad game design ends and bugs begin. Heck, I don't know where lore ends and bad game design ends. They're so incoherently mixed together that like I'm left being like I don't know what's real basically. I don't understand what's what. Um and that might also
Is that from like a normie-ish experience of video games? Like you've said before that you have like the vaguest understanding of video games, or is that just from like a standpoint of within the actual set universe of the game itself?
within everything. That's what I'm saying, is that I think like I think big studios get a pass cuz at the very least there's some competency at every level. even if like the story doesn't really make sense and the mechanics are bad, usually it's at least consistent in one way or another. Um, like even Security Breach is somewhat consistent in its gameplay, right? Like it's confusing, sure, but it's coherent. You may not like it, but it's
I mean,
coherent.
consistent in as much as how many bugs show up in the increments of 5 and 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's consistent.
yeah, yeah. But something like Garden of Banban is that like when I encounter a bug, like I don't even know if it's intentional or not. Like what I was talking about with the whenever you go to Banbalina's classroom, there's a scene that I never saw that's supposed to tell you what to do. And I don't know if it didn't fire because it was a bug or because the game was so poorly designed I just didn't hit the right triggers. So I don't know if that's like on a meta level, a game level, or anything. Like that's how incoherent the game is. I can't even tell if I'm doing something wrong in universe or it's just so badly designed that there's some out of universe reason why stuff isn't happening. Like that's what
I
I'm
see.
saying is that like it blurs the lines between what's supposed to happen, what's not supposed to happen. Because when you're playing Security Breach and you get bugs, clearly that's not meant to happen. Very clearly,
Obviously.
it's not intentional. But when I'm playing something like Garden of Banban, I can encounter a bug and I'm like, I don't know if this is meant to happen or not. Like it's incoherent. You cannot tell where like one thing ends and the other begins. It's so mixed together that it's like I don't know what's happening. There's no
The
consistency.
the interesting point that you bring up too is that um, the funny thing is that it's part of that subgenre of meme culture and honestly of Steam culture nowadays with free Steam games that is the definition of a free Steam game. And with big name studios, when stuff like this happens, like you said, there's at least some level of competence. In my mind, that sometimes I have run into cases. I'm struggling to remember one off the top of my head at the moment, so of course I get no credibility because of that. But there have been cases that I remember either testimonials from or that I played once before, where a big name studio had a game that didn't have any competence at all, but it pretended like it did, and
Mm-hmm.
that was just insulting to my intelligence. But that being said, that's on a different level. However, when you have a big name studio that pretends to have some level of competence, that's like you said, it's different from when an indie game like a free Steam game by definition can't even pretend to have a level of competence because there is no competence.
Yeah.
And so what winds up so I guess the real problem with Garden of Banban 2 is that when you see the price tag, you think, oh, they're pretending to have a level of competence that wasn't illustrated in the first game.
Yeah.
So the second game better be pretty darn good. Turns out it's not. So they're pretending to have competence that doesn't even exist. In fact, I don't know. It's based on what you said. It seemed like there was negative competence.
Yeah.
And so it just seems like a free Steam game that costs money.
Yeah. Cuz again, if it was free, I would still rag on it and stuff, but it's like, it's
There's a
free.
different connotation
Who
with
can
it. There's a different
Yeah.
tone when discussing it.
If I pay for something, I whenever you pay for something, you're basically expecting that that money will translate into what you're getting. So when it doesn't, it's like, well, I'm not going to defend you for that because like I expect it to be $5 worth of gameplay. And it's not, so it's like, well, no, I'm not going to I'm gonna get mad at it because it's not that. It's not even that it's unenjoyable or like the worst thing ever. I think Crash and Run is probably objectively a worst game in terms of like bugs and stuff because it's like fundamentally unplayable
Is
because of
that the game that you reviewed with the terrible Steam game that was made worst?
yeah, yeah. Like that was probably
My favorite video.
objectively a worse game, but it didn't pretend like it was worth $5 of content. It wasn't trying, it was free. Same thing with Garna Banban. The developers were certainly trying, but the game doesn't feel like it's trying. So I'm like, alright, who cares? And then it's like, okay, so the game is clearly trying now. And it's
Yeah.
failing. It's insulting you at that point, like you said. So it's like, yeah, no. You don't get a defense anymore.
It's interesting because I guess that's what the main point of the original criticisms of the original game was because of the merch store. Like you
Mm.
brought up one of the key points of those arguments was that there was a merch store. So I guess people thought that it was taking on this absurd level of competence that it didn't actually have by putting up a merch store, not having to pay for the game, but there's additional ways to support a free Steam game, which
Yeah.
is odd because support for free Steam games and by definition are kind of hit and miss. Some work out and some don't. That one didn't because I guess it was presented in such a way that made it assume a certain level of competence that it didn't have, which turned out to tease an even bigger level of non-competence
Yeah.
or something. So, interesting. Now there is the reverse of this, where a game displays far more competence than it has, than even the developers lay on, and that is the game that I recently discovered and played, which I think I told you about. It's called Hi-Fi Rush,
Yeah, I actually
and
saw your video on it, shockingly.
oh my gosh, you watched my video. Anyways, that game, oh my goodness, I don't know, like it's only like 3 months old, and it's like it's so good. It's so good. Like the Xbox experience I had with it was phenomenal. The PC experience I've had with it is phenomenal, even though I'm a terrible gamer. And going from the easiest difficulty to the hardest difficulty was the worst decision I could have made at all because I didn't even do that with Doom, but I thought I could do it with a rhythm game because, rhythm, I'm a musician, I got this down. No. I can't memorize where the shift key is on my keyboard even still. I have no idea what I'm doing. But that game is, oh my gosh, that game. I highly recommend anybody who's even vaguely into rhythm games or games with like a sense of humor, you have to buy it. It's hilarious and it's awesome. It's super well designed and it's airtight. Like I've been trying to break the game and I can't find it. It's so good. I love it. I love it. I don't know what your impressions were of my playthrough of it because I died so many times.
No,
Probably gave it a bad rep, but
it looked fun, but I guess for me, how do I phrase this? How do I phrase this without revealing my inner game snob? It was a console game. I don't know if that makes sense. There's just certain games that like feel very console-y to me, I guess, and it's like, also I'm just not good at rhythm games. Let me tell you a story of Miguel when he was a wee little lad. So we've had games before. So
time. Let's go.
we had Donkey Kong Country, right? Good game. Loved it. So we were like, we're gonna get this Donkey Kong game where you have to like control with the bongos, right?
Yeah, yes, the bongo controller. That's awesome.
I never played the game because I couldn't get past the sinking part.
I. What part is that? I've never played Donkey Kong Country.
Oh no. What? It's not a part of the game. It is literally the opening thing where it says, "Hey, we have to sync the controller
Oh, the
to the Wii."
syncing.
Yeah, so like you have to hit it on time. Yeah, I couldn't get past that part, so that's how good I am at rhythm games.
Bro couldn't sync a
Yeah.
bongo controller.
I'm really good at these types of games.
It's funny because I've played like mobile rhythm games before, and I was like, "Oh, surely this can't be that different." And I'm sitting here with an Xbox controller. I'm like, "This is completely
Oh,
different."
it
What
is.
was I thinking?
Yeah.
This is totally different than some like anime rhythm game I got on the Play Store for free because I was bored out of my mind. But it was really fun because, and you are right, it feels like a console game. And I can attest to this because the very first time I played Doom 2016 was on someone's PS4,
Hmm.
and that was very difficult. Also because he was really mean and he put it on ultraviolence at the start. I hadn't even played it before, and I couldn't get through the first mission because he put it on ultraviolence. I don't even
Base.
have a second gun at the end of that stage. And then he put on Doom Eternal on ultraviolence, and I couldn't get past the first combat arena. I barely got past the first combat arena. And it felt so odd in a controller, also because I hadn't played on a PS4 in like years. And when I actually got them on the PC, everything clicked. And it felt like a game that was made more for the PC, or at least made more for my dumb
Yeah.
PC Master Race mind.
That
Hi-Fi Rush, I have not gotten used to, and maybe it's because I beat the whole thing at my friend's house on the Xbox, but I have to look at the combinations on the screen with my mouse and translate, okay, this button means X, this button means Y, this button means B. And it's broken my brain. I think I have to get a controller just so I can play it competently. It's
y-
that bad.
no, 100%. Games are definitely designed for certain things. Like I played Jedi Fallen Order, and that is certainly not designed for a keyboard. It was enjoyable. It really wasn't like a bad experience. Like it wasn't like the keyboard controls are awful. Just whenever you get to like combinations and like combos and stuff, a lot of the times it just does not transfer properly to keyboard and mouse. Just with like input times and like pressing two things at once, it just doesn't always translate super well. Especially not to me with my little gremlin PC mind that is like, you can't press two buttons at once or everything will explode. So
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't designed for it. It wasn't bad, but yeah, there are certainly games that are more designed for a controller than they are a keyboard and mouse. And there's games that are designed for a keyboard and mouse and not a controller. Like I don't almost every shooter game really works better with a keyboard and mouse in my opinion. And
Yeah,
it
I would
really,
agree.
I don't think that's really like a controversial thing. If you like, controller, that's fine, but it's like just by the nature of how they work, they just work better on a keyboard and mouse in general.
Yeah. Which is really funny because then there are those people that are completely out of their minds and just want to play shooter games on controllers only and like hate the idea of a keyboard. Like
I
their
don't understand
brains
that.
work differently. Okay, one of the guys that I play Pre-Fortress 2 with, Black Dynamite, when I first started playing the game, he was his one gimmick. He was so notorious for not only being friendly, but he would hook up a controller, I think it was an Xbox controller, to his computer, and he somehow mapped the Pre-Fortress 2 controls to his Xbox, and he got to the top 20 in the stats just by doing that.
Bruh.
Like he got so good with the controller. He's arguably the best player of the entire game just on that basis alone because nobody's even tried. Like because it's so hard. It's so hard to remap the game itself, let alone your mind to like ping like 5 headshots in a row on Team Fortress 2 with an Xbox controller. How do you do that? It's like don't like you're on another level. I'm ashamed to call myself a gamer now.